Well, hello. Welcome back to another week, another episode of Fridays at First. We've been a couple weeks since we've been in here. We recorded two weeks ago, and we were in Jamaica last week. And so we made it there, back, obviously. We're back. So things are good. The trip went well, but we're glad to be back into the, I guess you can say, the studio. The podcast studio. YouTube studio, and we're going to be talking about last week's message, which was a message from Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 11, entitled Sabbath Struggles. And so with that, I will turn it over to our number one over here. What's going on?
All right, so like you said, we have a sermon related to the Sabbath, and it wasn't all about the Sabbath, but it was definitely dealing with Jesus and the Sabbath and the Pharisees and them trying to trip up Jesus. But I want us to talk about the Sabbath, is help us get us a better understanding about that, at least start with that. So what is Sabbath and what should we know about it?
Yeah, it's healthy to understand that when you want to know, and I do this a lot in sermons, and some people laugh at me, some people, one of those things they prod at because I do it almost every week. If we want to understand something, we need to know the definition of what we're trying to understand. And so I'll put a lot of definitions, even of English words, because sometimes we will use an English word that we know how to use it in a sentence, but if you were to ask what's the definition of that word, you would have to think, well, how do I describe this word? And so same thing with Sabbath. If we want to really understand what Sabbath is, what does the word mean? Well, the Lord used that word for a reason when he gave us the commandment, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. He could have used anything. He could have used any word. Remember, he could have labeled that day anything he wanted to label it. But the word Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word that means to cease or to rest. And so the definition of the word is to cease or to rest. Now, if you look at the fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath, that is, remember to cease. Remember the Sabbath day, to cease day, and keep it holy. That word holy is separate, or it's a word for sanctified, meaning nothing compares to it. So Jesus, the Bible tells us, is holy. In the Old Testament, the angels call God holy, holy, holy. And the reason we call God holy is because there's nothing that compares to him. He is set apart. So the commandment says, remember the Sabbath day, remember the cease day, the rest day, and keep it set apart, keep it separate. So technically what the Sabbath was a day that God gave the Israelites in the Old Testament to cease their normal activities, cease their work, their toil, their thing, and just go to the synagogue, worship together, and then spend the rest of the day and rest with their family and friends.
Yeah, no, and I think that's so good because I think I hear it everywhere. Heard a lot from Jefferson Bethke, from other people of just, we live in a culture where it's kind of the opposite of that. I live in a culture that is hurried, rushed, and endlessly hustling, and we're almost getting to the point where in normal culture, we don't even know what rest even looks like. And so would you speak into that at all of we're in a culture where we might not know how to Sabbath or how to rest or what that should look like? What should that look like for us today?
Yeah, and it's hard because, if you look back, the principle of the Sabbath was set in creation. God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. He didn't need rest. We've already spoke more words here than I believe God did in all creation. He said, let there be light, separate the light from darkness. And it wasn't exhausting for him. I mean, even if he would have had to put a ton of physical labor in it, he's God. It would have been exhausting for him. But he didn't need rest. It was an example for us because he knew that we'd have the tendency, because work means provision means success. And so to work, and never take time to just do what's very beneficial for us, that is to just rest. So I will say this, one reason it's hard in our culture to rest is because this might be a little different from where you thought we were going, but we've lost the ability to be bored. Sometimes rest equals boredom. Days when I'm at home with my family sometimes and there's no sports going on, we don't have much to do, where we get up, we eat breakfast, we stay around the house, lay around the house. Sometimes kind of feels boring, but at the end of the night you're like, wow, that felt good. That was rest. And so I think sometimes we just lost the ability not to be entertained by something. And so the Sabbath, and Rachel, my wife, will say this a lot, it's okay for kids to be bored. It's okay. Boredom creates creativity. And same thing with families. It's okay to sit around your house at night and sit in your living room with no TVs on and talk to each other. It's okay to play video games, or you could play video games, but play board games with each other. It's okay to go outside and go on a walk as a family. Like, we've lost the art of being able to do nothing. So.
Oh, you're so right. And we just went through a series with our youth students on about being unplugged, and like how the world around us, as well as our phone, is shaping us into a type of person. And the person it's shaping us into is a person who's more anxious, more hurried, who's less caring, and more selfish. And it wasn't the only thing we talked about. One of the things we talked about was how our phone is affecting us. And one of those aspects we talked about a lot was we don't have moments of stillness anymore. And we talked about the need for solitude and quiet, and specifically from our phone, because we don't have moments where we're not doing anything. And again, I've said this in a sermon, I've said this on the podcast. Again, I am someone in this culture, and there is something that is so easy when I'm not doing anything at all to just pull out my phone and then just brain-numbing, mindless scrolling that isn't beneficial for me or isn't beneficial for the people around me. And I love what you said about board games or even video games or different things that especially when things that bring us together, because so often, not always, but so often our phone more disconnects us, and it's more of that self-entertainment than a family experience or a relationship experience or something that grows you into deeper relationship.
Yeah, and you gotta discipline, and we'll look at this here in a minute. The Sabbath is good, but good things you often have to discipline yourself to do. And that's what you got to understand. Yes, when I'm sitting around with my wife and kids, and it's a battle. I'm not saying I'm good at it all the time, but it's a battle not to pull my phone out. The natural tendency is, okay, they're watching whatever show on TV, and my wife's probably scrolling through Amazon shopping on her phone, or she's reading a book or something, and I'm just sitting there, and it's just, man, pull that phone out and start scrolling on your own. It's discipline not to do that, but that's something that when I don't do it, I feel grateful. I feel good. And so it's just that putting in that discipline that, man, there needs to come a day, like you said, that we unplug. And we can maybe dive into this now as opposed to later, but, no, we're not held to the Sabbath day as a, we don't have to, the Sabbath day in the Old Testament was Saturday, right? We don't have to take one day of the week and say this day we can't do anything. But the principle, just because it's not a have to, it doesn't mean it's not a should do. And so the principle is very applicable. So I was talking to our Wednesday midweek this week, and it was that in the Old Testament, you divide the laws up into three categories: ceremonial, civil, and moral. And that means all those laws, was it written for the Jewish nation? Was it written for Judaism? Was it written for people's relationship with God and others? Those Old Testament precepts that were written for our relationship to God and others are still very applicable to us today. So yes, there's a ceremonial part of the Sabbath in the old, where the Jewish faith, you observe the Sabbath. We're not held to that anymore, because we're not Jewish. We're not Judaism, and we're not Jewish people. There's a civil part of that where the Old Testament Israeli law was, you keep this day. We're not held to that because we're not Old Testament Israeli citizens. But there's a moral aspect of that where rest greatly impacts our relationship to God and our relationship to people. And that's why the Bible says over and over, be still and know. Jesus went out away from people in solitude and spent time with the Lord. The principle of rest, not just doing nothing, but resting in the Lord, resting with the Lord, resting so you can spend time with your family and your friends, is so vital and necessary to our well-being.
Oh, and I love how you put it at the beginning of this, because I think when I was younger, the more I heard about Sabbath, the most thing I heard about it was, we're no longer under the law. We don't have to live by that Sabbath of where Saturdays or even Sundays are exactly this exact way, and we're not under the law anymore. And I love how you put it with just because we don't have to do something doesn't mean we shouldn't do something. And there's a beneficial thing with it, because I think we can so easily dismiss it of like, well, I'm not under the law, I don't have to do it. But there is something about Sabbath rest, about being intentional about resting in God, with worshiping Him, spending time with family, getting unplugged from things that distract us from that rest, that benefits that day, your family, and then even the rest of the week. That's just a benefit and life-giving that we can't just dismiss as, well, I don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, well, we could hit this 100 times, but there's something I encourage people to look at when they look at God gave the Israelis commands that were beneficial for them. He gave His people, the Jewish people, those commands. So I would even go this far as saying, no, we're not held to make a day where we can't do anything but that was what God said His people should. So I still think it's a fantastic principle. Just because it's not, you can't do this anymore, man, it's a fantastic principle. If God said for His people in the Old Testament, I want you to keep one day set apart, man, it must be important. So no, you don't have to for legalism or pharisaicalism or anything, but the principle, I believe, is still super beneficial. Keep one day. And in our day, it's Sunday, because in the Old Testament, the Sabbath was you go to the synagogue in the morning and you worship. You hear the reading of the Word, you worship together, and then you go home and you spend time. And so that's our Sunday, because we gather to celebrate the resurrection, and we go to church, we celebrate. And I told our church this week, man, it's my favorite day of the week, even when if I was not in the pastorate, to get up, go to church, fellowship, drink coffee, go to Connect group, fellowship with people, and then go sing with my church family and listen to a message, and then go home and spend time resting with my family. What a wonderful day. Why do we fight against that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I have two practical questions for us related to that of one part of your sermon was getting against not being legalistic with it, like the Pharisees. And so kind of a twofold question of, how do we not get legalistic with it and make it something where it more than it should be, and being too harsh and strict with it. And then you advocated for making Sundays that Sabbath, and I wanted to see if you could answer that and then talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and so we'll start with the last question first. I think Sunday is the best day for now. Some people have to work on Sunday. Mm-hmm. Police officers, firefighters, nurses, church staff. Yeah, church staff. I mean, there are people who can't Sabbath on Sunday because they have to work. I understand that. So I would encourage those people to find a day of the week you can Sabbath and protect that day, or even if it's just the evenings of those days. But for those who don't work the weekends, those who work your Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, man, Sabbath is for the Lord, but it's also for our relationship with others. And what better day to do that than on Sunday? Because you're already taking that morning you should be anyways, gathering with your faith family. I mean, it's what you do. And then you have that avenue plus the afternoon. I just liken it to the Saturday of the Sabbath. They worshiped in the morning. They spent time with their families in the evening. And I think it's so much easier for us just to say as a people, okay, one day, not because some people are going to try to complicate this. Well, what if I do 2 half days? What if I do Friday night for my family and then Saturday night for the Lord? We live under grace. Do what you feel the Lord leading you to do. I'm not going to tell you not to. But man, that's not the same as working all day and coming home and spending 5 to 9 with your family. It's not the same as getting up and doing nothing all day long. Doing no obligations all day long. So I would say that the other part of your question is, there's not really, the Pharisees got in trouble because they asked that same question. How do we protect the Sabbath? And so in the Old Testament, God pretty much just gave about 3 actual commands. Might have been 3 or 4, around 3 actual commands about what not to do on the Sabbath. But the blanket statement was, don't work on the Sabbath. You are not to do any work on the Sabbath. Leviticus 23:3. And so what the Pharisees did was well, how do we protect that? How do we define work? And so they put a lot of their opinions into, so it's kind of like a cell. You're trying to protect the nucleus, so you put a lot of cushion around it. So what they did was like, okay, so we don't ever threaten with working. Let's say you can't walk more than 2,000 steps a day on a Sabbath. Let's say you can't spit on the ground because that could make mortar. Let's say that you can't look in the mirror because you might, and this is legit stuff, you might see a spot on your face or gray hair that you need to go then tend to. That's going to be work. And so they put all these opinions behind the law and the opinions were not biblical. So long answer to that question, but I would say this, and we talked about it in our Wednesday night this week. You have freedom on the Sabbath, man. And what I would tell you is, you need to follow your convictions. Number one, you need to make sure they're your convictions and not they're biblical convictions and not just what you're trying to tell yourself is okay. But if you feel like it's okay to do, then follow the Lord. And that's why the Lord gave them grace even in the Old Testament. Don't work. Because there's going to be some things like going outside and playing ball with your kids was not work. It was fun. You could go soccer ball with your kids, but the Pharisees said, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. So we have to guard from telling people, hey, you can't do this, or you can't go to the lake on the Sabbath, or you can't do this on the Sabbath. But we also just need to keep the principle of it as this. Hey, the Sabbath is for you to cease from what you normally do, rest in God, and rest with people. And not really easy way to put that, but it's just not putting. So let's go for a minute about blue laws. So do you know what blue laws are?
So I'm guessing laws specifically related to Sabbath. Is that what it is?
Yeah, and so it was back in the early part of our I think the 19th century or 1900s, 20th century, where it was laws that stores had to be closed on Sundays, and things couldn't function. They closed down everything. See, I'm not even pro that. Like I don't think the government should demand things to be closed on Sunday, but I'm a huge proponent of Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby. They don't have to close, but they're choosing to honor God by giving their people and their employees Sunday off. And the Lord's blessed that. You can see that. So I would just say, don't put laws behind it. Don't put have-tos around people's Sabbath. But at the same time, if you neglect resting in the Lord and resting that enhances relationships, you're sinning against the Lord because it's a command to rest.
Yeah, and then I related to what the Pharisees were trying to trip Jesus on, of like, oh, you're healing on the Sabbath, and so then you're like subverting doing good for God, and you're actually hurting people and hurting the cause of what God is trying to do by putting too much rules and restrictions on the Sabbath. Again, that you said weren't actually what God called us to do.
Well, that's what Jesus said. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? Meaning he healed a guy. That was good. If he would not have healed that guy, that would have been bad because he could, it was in his will to heal that guy. And so Jesus is simply saying here, not doing good is doing evil. And so if you're presented with something on the Sabbath, for example, I use the illustration, if you're walking around, somebody passes out and their heart stops beating and you can do CPR on them, but you're like, oh, it's the Sabbath, sorry, we'll do that tomorrow. You're depriving that person of life. That's evil, right? And so I take it back to more of a modern illustration of like in Nazi Germany, if like you were like hiding Jews from the Nazis and some Nazi official knocked on your door and said, do you have Jews here? Well, do you lie and say no? Or do you tell the truth and say, yeah, they're under the floor, the floorboards, come get them? Well, the principle is the same. Yes, thou shalt not lie, but at the same time, turning over those Jewish people is doing evil because you are giving up life. So, that's a whole sermon in itself, come with Rahab and the Hebrew midwives and all this type of stuff. But the principle of that is that, yes, there's a religious observance, religious command that thou shalt not lie. But in that situation, you're presented with, number one, you're not really lying because the government is held to God. Even in our culture, again, man, I'm getting way off here, but government's held to the authority of God, right? So if a government comes in and says, I have to give up somebody in my house to be killed for no reason, then I answer to God, not to man, okay? And so, but that's something. But if you look at it in their immediate context, they were choosing between the life of people, and that trumps people take precedence every time. And the same thing is true with the Sabbath. When it came to doing good for people and serving people, people trumped religious observance.
Yeah, and I would say when it comes to spiritual disciplines, and I would put Sabbath rest and with some of the other spiritual disciplines of when it comes to these things, be prepared for interruptions. Of Jesus, plenty of times was interrupted from what he was trying to do. I think we talked about this not that long ago, but right before he fed the 5,000, Jesus was like, it says they were coming and going and they didn't even have time to eat. Mm-hmm. And Jesus is like, hey, we need to stop and we need to get away to a quiet place. And probably referring to, like Jesus often did, to spend time privately with God and with him. And so he's saying we need time to rest. And then what happens is they try to get away on a boat and the people followed them around and so you tried to get away and they showed up at your
They're
door.
still there.
Yes. And then it leads into him feeding the 5,000. And but here's the thing, he didn't get rid of his discipline and his the spiritual discipline of spending time with God. What he did is he fed the 5,000. He had mercy and grace on the people in need. And then afterwards it said he went up to the mountaintop and he spent all night praying. Yeah. And so allow for interruptions. There's going to be times, whether it's your quiet time, whether it's Sabbath rest, where people or things that either people in need or God's going to ask you to do things that may change that for that moment. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean you just neglect it as I'm told. Just because there's exceptions to the rule doesn't mean you throw out the rule.
I love that. Yes, I like that statement. Just because there's exceptions to the rule doesn't mean you throw out the rule. And I think that's important, man. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I mean, this sermon this Sunday is not really about Pharisees and all that type of stuff, but one of the points is going to touch on a little bit. And we as a culture need to remember that it's okay to choose the spiritual or the secular. Let me stop it. It's okay to choose the spiritual over the secular. You see, so, and I know people would say, well, it's okay to choose this. But in my experience as a pastor, 9 times out of 10, when a secular thing and a spiritual thing meet head to head, we always choose the secular. If school event and church hit the same night, if a sporting event and youth camp happen the same week, fill in the blank, we're always choosing the secular at the expense of the spiritual. And we need to reverse that. The Sabbath is choosing the spiritual over the secular, saying, yes, 6 days out of the week I will do this or I will do that. But today, no, I'm not running the rat race today. I'm not giving in. And we need to repopularize, if that's a word, choosing the spiritual over the secular. Like, it's okay when the spiritual comes head to head against a secular event to choose. And I even go this far as, we got Light Up OG coming in a couple Saturdays. I'm sorry if you have a secular thing planned that day, but it's one Saturday. I mean, we have other things on Saturdays, but this is one. It's okay to choose serving your community, loving on people in your community, providing for people over whether you're going to a ball game or whether you got to go back to school shopping that day or whatever it is. That's kind of what the Sabbath does. It's a day you choose the spiritual over the secular because you got to have it in life.
Oh, yeah. And that's even a discipline in and of itself of to say yes to the things that you need to say yes to, that God wants you to say yes to. That means at times you will have to say no to things. And sometimes they're good things. Sometimes there are other good opportunities out there, but to say yes to what God wants to say yes to, sometimes you have to say no.
To what you want. And I remember what Peter said to Jesus, or we have forsaken all and followed you. And I would ask Christians in our day and age, when have we ever forsaken to follow Christ? Like, when have we ever said no to a secular thing or a fleshly? And I'm not talking about like sin. I'm not talking about, sleeping around or drunk. I'm talking about like things in your life, like your calendar, like your sports or whatever. When have you ever said no to them, forsook those to follow Christ? And we need to ask ourselves that question, because if we're not careful, and we got to take a break here in just a second, but if we're not careful, we get in this habit of, VBS is this week. Well, sorry, I had plans that week. Well, we put this out a year of advance. Like, the calendar's way out there when VBS is going to be. It's okay. Look ahead. Plan your vacation. Plan your trips. This is a week you need to set apart for the Lord. Yeah. And that's okay to say no to those things, to say yes to better things.
Yeah. And I'll just add right here, right before we go on a break, there's grace. There's going to be times where we fall short and we chose the wrong thing. We chose the thing
100%.
that we all make mistakes. We all fall short. And so there is grace. If you are in a season where you're like thinking back and like, man, maybe I did say yes to the wrong thing. There's grace for you. And this is where it's a discipline. Just like working out, it's not going to come, you're not going to be perfect at it overnight. But consistently, we need to have that Sabbath rest, that ability to say no and saying yes to what God wants for us.
And there's 100% grace, but there are times we have to admit wrongdoing. Yes, there's grace, but things I experience grace for are things I've admitted I've done wrong, and I need God's grace for. So it's not to beat you up, but I guarantee you, myself included, every Christian listening to this examines their life, realizes that we often choose the secular over the spiritual, and if we would be wise to repent of that and receive God's grace for it.
Yeah, and if we're honest, a lot of times it's selfishness.
It's
we're
100%.
choosing ourselves and what we want more than what God has for us, because it's easier to just do what we want.
All the time. Hey, we'll be right back. Quick break coming up. We'll see you in just a minute. Welcome back. Let's continue our conversation on the Sabbath.
All right. And so one question that I had, and I know that you have two others that you want to get at, but one question I had real quick is, when it comes to those people who are not using it as an excuse, but for whatever reason can't make Sunday their day of rest, what advice would you give to them? Whether that's they work in, like, as first responders, or maybe they work in a church and so most of that day is spent serving. Is there any advice you'd give to those who maybe have to do their day of rest on a Saturday or a different day of the week?
Yeah, 100%. So I work on Sundays. I don't know if you know that or not. I work on Sundays. But, I talk to pastors and they say they don't consider stuff because they expect everybody to be at church on Sunday just like them. But no, if you're in the ministry, it's not coming to church on Sunday. It's the days I'm off or I'm on vacation, I actually get to go to church. It's so much more relaxing than it does not compare. So yes, it is work. It's a good work, but it is work for Sunday. So what we do is, we've always protected a day as a family, that this is our day. So for example, in my previous church, it was Mondays a lot of the time. Mondays is our day. I don't answer phone calls unless it's an emergency. I don't go anywhere. It's protected. Now it's Fridays. Fridays is that day that, I tell Thursday nights I'll do anything, Saturday, but unless it's an emergency, I'm not going to do anything on Fridays, because that's the day that we've protected as a family to Sabbath together. Now, I would still call our Sunday morning as our Sabbath in the Lord because we're coming to church, we're worshiping with our faith family, we're doing all that. So I would encourage two things. One, you probably have a day or two off, even if it's not Sunday. Pick one of those days and protect it. Say, this is the day. I'm not hunting with my buddies this day. I'm not fishing. I'm not going to get my nails done with my girlfriends today. This is my family day. This is the day I'm going to do nothing but be with them. And if you can't make it to church with your family on Sunday, praise the Lord that we have 1 billion live stream services on the internet that you can get your family. Now, I hope your family's still going to church on Sunday, but you can sit down with your family in your living room, watch a sermon together, worship together, and just family devotional time. Just spend time consciously, reflecting on the Lord with your family on that day.
Oh yeah, I think that's really good advice, and that's something Emma and I are working on Saturdays. Since we are doing more stuff on Sunday mornings, you can't replace the worship service and the sermon. That's a must-have. It's so beneficial for our souls. But that rest part of it, for us, we try to set apart Saturdays where and we've been working towards it. On Saturdays we're trying to not be on our phones. Just put that away, spend time with each other, spend time with God, and let that be a day of rest.
Yeah, I gotta have it. I just, again, there's grace. Don't beat yourself up. Don't, if you have a week you don't have, okay, but just I promise you, and this is a segue to our next topic. The first point of our sermon was the purpose of the Sabbath, and in our text it said that man was not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man. So it's not like that. Before God created man, he had this day of this called the Sabbath. And he said, this day needs something. Let's create man. So now the Sabbath has man to on. No, God created man. And after he created man, he created the Sabbath for man. And so it's important to understand it, and don't miss this. This is such a vital topic. Every command the Lord has given us is for our good. Now, that's hard to see sometimes. Even if you go back into the Israeli law, like a lot of those laws he gave about what to eat, what not to eat, there was health implications behind that. There was a reason he set them apart. Now, thankfully, we're not held to that because I like pork and I like, some fish and stuff like that they couldn't eat. But there was still a reason behind it. There was a health benefit behind it in a lot of areas. But I look at a couple of the main things in Scripture. Like, for example, there's a reason God said, be not drunk with wine. It's not to restrict you from enjoying life, but it's because you don't enjoy life drunk. I've never met somebody who was a drunkard that said, man, I'm so glad I'm drunk all the time. No, drunkenness causes things that happen that wouldn't normally happen. Now, we're not talking about moderate drinking. That's between you and the Lord. I understand what people, well, you don't understand. I abstain completely because I don't see any benefit in it whatsoever. But I'm not saying that you have to abstain completely. That's between you and the Lord. But 100% of the time, the Lord calls drunkenness a sin. Yep. And it's because it's not good for us. He's actually giving us that command for us because he knows what drunkenness leads to. Go to another one, sexual promiscuity. Like, God didn't just say, I don't want you to enjoy this thing called sex I've created. No, he says, I don't want you to enjoy it outside the bounds you need to enjoy it. It's for you, it's for a husband and a wife in an exclusive partnership. It's not, I've never met people who have had multiple partners and we're thankful for that. What happens when you have multiple sex? Well, first, you have kids that have broken homes. You have the foster care system like we see. You have diseases. You have all these things. And so God gives us those commands for us. Hey, so you can have life abundant. So you can have life of peace. Do these things. And the Sabbath is that way. God created the Sabbath for us. It wasn't to be a burden. It was to be a blessing. You need a day. You need this. It's for you. I'm not up here saying, well, I need to give them another rule, so let's just say you can't do anything on Saturday. No, it's you need this day. And so we must understand that as all God's commands, rest, the Sabbath, it's not a checkbox God demands of us just because he wants something for us to do. He actually gave it for us. And as a result, we need it.
Yeah, and that's... I like how you put it with all these things of he's not keeping us from life. We think, again, we can have that mindset where he's preventing me from living out this fun, cool life. But he's not keeping us from life. He's actually leading us to life. And like that, whether that's drunkenness or like drinking, whether that's sex, whether that's the Sabbath, his rules and commands are not to hinder us, but to help us.
Like, thou shalt not lie. Nothing good happens to a liar. Like, he gave you that command because your life's going to be a mess if you're a habitual liar. Thou shalt not steal. Your life's not going to be better for stealing. Thou shalt... All these commands are good things for us not to do, but they're for us because he wants us to have life abundant and full of glory. Now, abundant doesn't mean without hardships. Abundant doesn't mean we're healthy, wealthy, and whole. Abundant means spiritually. He wants us to have life full of peace and rest and patience and goodness spiritually. And in order to have that contentment, that fulfillment, that peace, you need to do it the way he said do it.
Well, and this just made me think, because you were saying these other examples, and one thing that ties a lot of this together is just this normal principle. The principle of wisdom that we see in normal everyday life is cutting corners and shortcuts don't actually work. And you see that in the physical health realm. Take this pill and all of a sudden lose all your weight, or do this or whatever.
100%.
And like there's these shortcuts that you think will be good for you. And like, that's same thing with like we were just talking about relationships and marriage and like relationships out of marriage. I don't want to wait for marriage. I'm going to go my own way. I'm going to make the shortcut. It's going to be better for me. Not better for you.
Not better,
Not
ever.
good. And then with stealing, you think it's going to be a shortcut to getting the thing that you desire, but it just brings pain and suffering.
In prison.
And then we do this with rest too. We think if we just work all the time and have no rest, then we'll get more done and we'll accomplish more.
Be more fulfilled.
You accomplish less and you're less fulfilled. And I just heard Jefferson Bethke and John Mark Comer talk about it on their podcast where they were talking about their 2 books related to Sabbath. Funny enough is the societies that tried to get rid of the seventh day of like rest and like a day where you're taking a break and like work through all of it, they were trying to move to like 10-day work weeks or something like that. All of those societies have like realized very quickly how poorly it is. It didn't make people more productive. It made people get less done and be less fulfilled. And there's a reason why societies across the entire globe work off on a 7-day work week.
And I want to hit that for just a minute more, because there's something we talked about: 6 days you will labor, the seventh you will rest. We need to understand that you're not saying as a Sabbath that, hey, the more Sabbath you have, meaning let's Sabbath for 6 days and work for one. No, God made it where we are to work, we are to labor. And the Sabbath is, you're going to work for 6 days. Like, majority of your week is going to be working, but one day, and that's, when you said that, it made me think of it. I read an article last week or a couple weeks ago about how America is one of the only cultures that still only averages like 11 days of vacation a year, 8-hour, 5-day-a-week work weeks. And so you see this, especially with AI, you see this tendency to give people less work time and more play time. And you got to guard against that too, because if you're idle and you don't have that, then you're going to get in trouble. And so God also knows that if we're not busy laboring, whatever that looks like, working towards something, then we're going to find ourselves in a mess too. So there's that balance. There's got to have rest. You don't need to work 10 days a week, have a 10-day work week. But at the same time, I don't think it's healthy to go to a 2-day work week and 5-day rest, because then you're going to have a whole lot of people with nothing on their minds or their hands, and it's going to be trouble. So that holy balance is important.
Oh, and I like that of like, we need to, this isn't a call to work less hard or like not work hard. This is a call to work hard. Like, God has called us to work hard and do what He's called us to do, not be lazy, but be intentional with rest. And then that enables us to better work hard and to love the people around us and do what God's called us to do.
And I will even throw another one out there like this, and people might laugh at me for this, but sometimes you have to rest to work. And one thing I'm a huge proponent of, in fact, I don't care if all of our staff does it, is, and the Hispanic culture, man, they nailed this, and that's the siesta. Like, I've read where CEOs are giving their employees a lot of times like a 30-minute break after lunch to take a nap, because I've tried working. Now, it's not every day, but there are days after I eat lunch where I just feel that immense exhaustion, and I try to work through that, whether it was here when I was at Quick Trip or when I was in another part of the world or working world, and it would just be brutal. Well, then I realized if you take a 10 to 12-minute nap, you're good to go. And even something like that, you need to understand there's now I'm not telling you to sleep on the job, by the way, but what I'm telling you is there's even that essence of, in the immediate context, sometimes you have to have just a few minutes of rest to get you more productive in work. And the same thing is in life. You have 1 day of rest, you're going to be more productive for 6 days than you would be for 7.
And that's even, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Old Testament, isn't there a passage talking about letting the fields rest?
Yeah,
there's people that would work the fields because they thought they would be more productive if they just kept on working the fields, but they were supposed to let them rest.
Yeah,
and it ended up being
the
better.
7th year they were supposed to let the fields rest. I believe, you theologians out there, I'd have to go back but I believe it's every 7th year they were to let the fields rest, and then the Jubilee year, the seventh year, they were to be a year where everything was returned to. If you had debt, you were taken into slavery. That everything reset after 49 years, the 7 sevens. And so, but every 7th year the land was supposed to rest. And when they didn't do that, and as a result, the Lord said, hey, because you didn't do what I said, the ground's not going to yield like it was. And I've even heard, again, some of you nerds out there, no offense, might know more than this about me, but there was even some scientific study done about the benefit of resting soil a year after so many, and how it impacts the nutrients and everything, which, again, everything God tells us to do, there's a benefit. He didn't just say, rest your fields in the 7th year because I think you should. No, there has to be a benefit for the fields and the soil and the crops in doing that. So.
Yeah. And so I think one last question that we should get at, you were talked about in the sermon of the Lord of the Sabbath. So what is it? Who is the Lord of the Sabbath, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so a lot of times Jesus had some sarcasm with the Pharisees, but this might have been a tinge of sarcasm, but it really was him telling them, because some people will say, well, why didn't Jesus just tell the Pharisees over and over again he was the Messiah? He did. And this was one of those areas. So in the text, he said, the Son of Man, he's referring to himself, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And so what that means, Daniel chapter 7, no Jewish scholar would really debate that the Son of Man referred to in Daniel chapter 7 is the Messiah. That's pretty much universally accepted in Judaism. And so Jesus was saying, I'm the Son of Man, that Messiah that's to come. I'm the Lord of this Sabbath, meaning like it's mine. I have authority over it. And so there's two things we get at with this that we need to. So one, he was declaring himself the Messiah. He was saying, hey, this is my day. I'm the Lord. I created. I'm Lord of this day. And then you take that back a little bit further. The Sabbath was given to them in the law. So if Jesus was the Lord of the Sabbath, then he was the Lord of the law, which means that he's the Lord of Moses and he's the Lord of all, And so he was telling them point blank, bluntly that I'm the one you're looking for. I'm the Messiah. But the second thing about that is this: if he is the Lord of the Sabbath, and he is, then he has the right to define the Sabbath. And so he's also telling them, listen, like, you're telling me what I can do and can't do on the Sabbath, but it's actually, I'm the one who set these parameters. It's my day. And so I know what I'm supposed to be doing on this. And so I would encourage you with this. When the Pharisees and Jesus come together, sometimes the Pharisees ask questions that we even wonder sometimes, like, why is Jesus able to do this? Or why is he... We need to understand that Jesus is the creator of all. He's the Lord of all. And so when the Pharisees' opinions differ from Jesus' actions, we need to understand that Jesus as Lord, he has the right to define what is good and what is wrong. He's not going to sin. He's not going to do wrong. And so if Jesus does it, it's the right way for it to be done. And that's what he was telling the Pharisees. Number one, I'm the Messiah. You should look to me. Number two, it's my day. I know the rules.
Boy, I'm laughing a little bit because I'm not saying I'm Lord or anything like that, but I had a similar experience this past Wednesday. I was setting up the 9 square, had some youth students helping me, and then I was setting it up right, and then Cash was like, oh, no, it's supposed to be this way. I'm like, no, it's not. And he's like, yeah, it is. And I'm like, no, I'm the Lord of the 9 square.
I'm the Lord. This is my 9 square. I know how it's supposed to go up.
But I'm sure, like... Man, the humility of Jesus to be the creator of all things and then deal with people constantly being like, no, you're wrong.
And no, I made it. I'm not wrong, I was there when Moses wrote it on the tablet. Remember Sabbath, keep it holy. And I just think it's so important for us to understand that we don't understand all things. We'll never understand all things, but sometimes we have questions about some things. And we need to remember that Jesus is Abraham says that, will the judge of all the earth not do what is right? Jesus always does what is right. And so when we don't understand, like the Pharisees humbly should have admitted, okay, you are the Messiah. I don't understand what you're doing, but I'm going to trust you. I referred to it on this podcast a few weeks ago. What I go back to in those periods of time of doubts is what Peter said to Jesus when a lot of Jesus's followers left, and Jesus said, are you going to leave too? And he said, well, where would we go? You have the words of eternal life. And so what Peter was saying right there is, Lord, I don't really have a clue what you just said either. Like, that creeps me out. Drink your blood and eat your body. Okay, but I know you have the words of life. So I'm going to keep following and just trust that you know what you're talking about and I don't know. And that's how we follow Jesus. Like, where else would we go?
And that gets into, like we talked about, I think, on last week's podcast, of being uncomfortable for God and uncomfortable for Jesus. And Jesus is going to lead us to times where we're uncomfortable, where we don't completely understand what's going on, but we can trust the one who's led us there, and he was continuing to lead us. And
the last thing I'll say on that is I have a discipleship meeting with a young man every Wednesday, and we were talking about that last night, and we were going through Hebrews 11 a little bit about faith, and we were talking about Moses, and I was talking about how the reason Moses had the faith to hold his staff up at the Red Sea, to part the Red Sea, was because every step before that, God had always come through. Moses didn't know why he was raised in the Egyptian household instead of the Hebrew household. He didn't know why it had to force to the land of Midian for 40 years, why the Lord had him go back and throw his staff on the ground before Pharaoh and turn the Nile into blood, but every single time God did exactly what he said he was going to do. So when he got to the river, or the Red Sea, he was probably like, this is weird, holding my staff up by the Red Sea. But he's like, Every other time I've done what he's told me to has come out, so he's come through. So he went up there. And so that's just when you follow him in those unknown, those uncomfortable things, he's going to do what he says he's going to do all the time. And when you experience it over and over and over again, you're going to come to a place tomorrow where you're completely uncomfortable. Like, hey, last week I was uncomfortable and the Lord was there. So I'm excited. You almost become excited to step out in those areas because every time he catches you, and it's just kind of one of those things, well, I'm going to step off again. How's he going to catch me this time? And so when you step in the uncomfortable, God comes and sees you through it, then you just get more and more excited to step into the uncomfortable every time. So
yeah, that's really good. So anything else you want to add related to this or for next week's sermon?
Man, no, I'm excited for this sermon, excited for this next week's sermon, is we're actually going to look at a pretty basic sermon. It's not going to be, it's going through the text. We're looking at what Jesus' people do, what Jesus' people do. And we're going to be talking, it's very basic, but it's going to be challenging in a lot of areas. We're looking at Jesus selecting his 12 disciples, and he takes his followers. Out of his followers, he selects 12 disciples. He names those 12 disciples, and he goes and ministers with them. So we're going to see what Jesus' people really do. We follow, we grow, we unite, and we go. There's the 4 little points for you. But it's actually going to be a great segue to our Who We Is series, because the points this week really resemble our 4 vision statements of connected by Jesus, growing in Jesus, serving for Jesus, going with Jesus. So we're going to tie that into the sermon this week.
Well, I'm looking forward to it.
Yep. Great. Good to have you, or good for you to have us, however you say that. I have no idea. But you have a great weekend. Remember, if you're part of our church and you're watching this, it's on the announcements, but you need to know VBS is next week. So next week when we have our podcast, we'll probably look hot and sweaty and tired.
And exhausted.
But we'll still be here. Have a great weekend.